Welcome back. This is part 2 of the truth of how to reamp your guitar, where we show you how to record, reamp, and mix your guitar to get the biggest, baddest, bluesy sound possible. In the previous video, we learned how to set up a duplicate signal when recording guitar with an ordinary passive or active direct box. This gives us the best of both worlds. It gives us a nice, clean hum and buzz-free signal that goes directly to our workstation that we can reamp with later, and it gives the artist the ability to play through their own gear, their own pedals and their own amps, so everything feels totally comfortable to them. We ran over how to get rid of common things like buzz and hum and that kind of stuff. So if you missed the video, check it out on the cards above. There's lots of great info on there. So we'll assume you've already gone and checked that out before we get started here. So today we're going to take that nice clean signal that we got into our DAW and we're going to reamp it back into the amplifiers of our choice and try a bunch of different configurations. So let's get started. The most basic form of reamping is you simply playing directly into your audio interface and then calling up a guitar soft synth or VST later in your audio workstation like Cubase. Cubase Pro has some amazingly powerful software built right into it called VST Amp Rack and gives you a variety of different amp configurations, stop boxes, matched cabinetry, and tons of different things to choose from high gain to low gain and really practically everything in between. Tons of other software options from third parties as well, such as Native Instruments Guitar Rig and Amplitude, Peavy's Revolver, Bias Amp and Effects, Scuffman S-Gear. These are all examples of really capable and very powerful pieces of software that allow you to reamp at its most basic level. They're great for recording yourself, or if you're in a home or an apartment where you can't make a lot of noise, this is a perfect solution for that kind of stuff. So if software is so perfect and awesome, why reamp back into an amplifier in the first place? Well, as it turns out, amplifiers are a lot of things, but perfect isn't any of them, and that's exactly what we're after. We want all those imperfections. The way the amp bounces around the room, the sound pressure it creates, the phase relationships it creates with the surfaces it bounces into, and all those wonderful and organic and musical imperfections add up to that incredible tone that is really difficult to recreate exactly in software. So to help us get started and illustrate the point, we are going to create a reference track inside of our workstation. We're going to create a folder and put 2 tracks in it. We're going to plug our guitar directly into a DI box like we did last video, and then that's going to go to the workstation. The split is going to go to the amplifier, and it's going to consist of a single guitar chord. There's our reference track. We get a nice clean DI input going straight to the board that we're going to use for reamping. And we have a reference microphone on the amplifier itself. This is super important because we're going to keep the volume input on the amplifier in exactly the same spot each time we reamp. And by using this reference track, we can tell whether or not we're overdriving or underdriving the signal based on this original sound. We're going to mute the reference track, and now we need to get our nice clean DI track from our workstation back out into the real world. To do that, we need to create another output besides the stereo ones on our audio interface. And that's done in the hardware configuration of the DAW you're using. In this case, ours is Cubase, so it's under the Studio tab, and we're going to create an additional output bus. We're going to name it Reamp Out, and then we're going to assign that output bus to one of the physical outputs on our audio interface. This gets our DI signal back out into the real world and allows us to start trying some of the most common reamp configurations. One of the first methods most people try is straight out of the back of the audio interface. This method takes the line output from the audio interface and plugs it directly into the amplifier, and it sounds like this. So that sucks in almost every way possible, and there's 2 really big and separate reasons for that. The first of those is because of something known as impedance. Tons of info on the net about this, but the short version is your audio interface puts out balanced line level signal, but your amplifier expects to see unbalanced instrument level signal. And without some kind of conversion, we're going to overdrive things. Going back to our original reference tone, which is the impedance that our amplifier expects to see, that's the guitar going straight into the amplifier. It's got a tiny little bit of hair, but it's pretty much clean. We can tell right away that aside from being noisy, the sound is actually overdriving the input of the amplifier and not very close to our reference. And the second big issue is hum and buzz. We dealt with this a little bit in the previous video on how to get nice clean signals into the DAW, but getting them back out suffers from the same problem. With nothing between the audio interface and the amplifier, there's simply no way to isolate ourselves from the two different grounding systems, which is a lot of the cause of the hum and buzz and grounding issues you hear on playback. The second method most people try is to try to solve the conversion problem by using an inline transformer. You may have seen these in some electronic stores or old Radio Shacks, or maybe even have stuff in your music gear, and these guys sound like this. As you can hear, the transformer has helped isolate us from some of those hum and buzz problems, but we are still a long way off from the expected impedance our amplifier wants, and as a result, we are even a little more overdriven than before. Third most common method people try is to use a DI box, but to use it in reverse. One of the most common questions I get in the studio is, can you use a direct box backwards as a reamp box? The short answer is yes. But like all short answers, there's a whole lot of exceptions. So number one, it actually has to be a passive direct box in order to work, because an active direct box has circuitry inside that cannot be run backwards. Plus, we get the benefit of being able to use the ground lift, which can help control buzz and hum dramatically. First, we take the balanced output from our audio interface and plug the other end of it into the XLR input of our direct box. The output of the direct box goes directly to the pedals or into the amplifier. And that setup sounds like this. All right, so as you can hear, we have dramatically improved the noise issue because of the better quality transformer, and because of the lift switch, we have almost completely eliminated the hum and buzz related issues. However, because of the fact that the transformer is going backwards, we're still dealing with the overdriven issue when we compare this to our original reference track. So still a long way off from the impedance that our guitar amplifier expects to see coming into it. Next most common method to try is that same exact configuration by using a DI backwards, except this time engaging the instrument/speaker switch, which inserts a 20 dB pad in between the signal and the transformer. And on top of that, it's also going to load that signal down to about the impedance level of a guitar speaker. It's going to dramatically drop the output. And that setup is going to sound like this. So as you can hear and see on the waveform, we have definitely gone in the opposite direction. We've definitely solved the noise issues, and we've solved all the hum and buzz issues, but we're not driving the amplifier anywhere near the loads it expects to see to wake up and get some of that killer guitar tone we're searching for. Which brings us to one of the last things people try when they're using a DI box backwards to reamp, which is instead of engaging the speaker switch, they go back into the DAW and change the playback level of the original track. We're going to go back up to our original DI track itself, and we're going to drop this track to about -30. We're going to try to come a little closer to that ballpark target that our original amp with the guitar going straight into it sounded like to begin with. That's going to sound like this. So there, as you can see and hear, we have done it. We have come very close to the original level that our amplifier expects to see as far as impedance. The one caveat, of course, is that because this DI box has a tendency to roll off some of the high end on the way in, it's also going to do the same thing on the way back out, and we've sacrificed quite a bit of that compared to the original reference tone. Which brings us to our last and final method of reamping guitars, which is to use a dedicated reamp box. Is it worth the extra $100 or even more for the more expensive reamping devices? Let's find out. This guy sounds like this. So as you can hear and see, this is nearly identical to the original sound of our reference track of the guitar going straight into the amplifier. Alright, so obviously the Pro RMP does a great job at getting the signal back into the amplifier at the right impedance, but also at the right level because of its adjustment knob. Its lift switch allows us to get the signal back in buzz and hum free, and does a great job on keeping the original color and tone. If, however, you need the absolute best in color transparency, you might be interested in the John Kunenberty version of the same box called the JCR1. This has a much higher quality transformer on the inside and is unbelievably transparent as far as tone and color for about $100 more. If you're doing a lot of high gain work or have specialty configurations like you want to plug into two different amplifiers when you reamp, you may be interested in the X amp, which is an active box for about the same price range. If you do a lot of metal or a lot of high gain precision tonal work, you might want to check out some of the products from a company called Two Notes. Their products such as the Reload and the Captor give you incredible control and flexibility over your signal for a bit more money. Now that we have an idea of which configurations work and which ones don't, it's time to put that stuff into practice. We're going to take those comped solo tracks that James from the Jess Ryan Band gave us in the last video, and now it's time to reamp those back into a couple of different amp choices and really start playing around with color and tone. For our setup, we are going to choose the Reamp Box configuration. This, by far and away, gives us the most amount of flexibility and control over the tone, the quality of it, and the level the amplifier expects to see. We've got all of James's killer solo tracks edited and ready to go. We're going to start with our trusty SM57s and begin reamping into a Marshall Mark II, just a hair off to the left of the cone. The Marshall's got a cool vibe, but it's a little bit overdriven for our taste for this particular track, so we're going to move on to a different amplifier and try a little darker tone. The Supro has such an awesome bluesy tone, and it's such a super fun amp to work with, but it's a little bit thick for the sound that the artist is going for. So we're going to move on to our trusted Deluxe, and we're going to start on the cone. So that's definitely the amp sound the artist is going for, but whoo, that's a little bit bright straight on the cone. So we are going to try a couple of different configurations on this amplifier. Recorded all of the amplifier configurations and decided to go with the Fender amp, so we've got all the Fender Reamp configurations in their own folders. And the reason why is because we've recorded along with the amplifier a room microphone as well, and this is going to be a big help when it comes to making the sound realistic later on. We've decided to go with the Fender Reamp dust cap configuration, which basically just means the microphone is on the seam where the dust cap and the speaker meet. And that configuration sounds like this. That's a great dry amplifier mic sound. That's going to work great in the mix. And here is the difference between adding the room sound as opposed to just the amplifier mic sound. It's a subtle difference, but it makes a big difference when we put it into a mix. It spreads the sound out in a more realistic way because the sound of the room is capturing all those imperfections we talked about earlier. The one thing that we have done with the room mic sound is put an EQ on that track just to roll off a little bit of the boomy bottom end and keep things nice and clean down there. All right, that's the start of the makings of a great sound. Let's head on over to the mix console and start putting this together with the rest of the music. First thing we want to do is put an EQ in the chain for our bus here. We're going to choose Waves RTA Stereo, and the reason why is this is really good at subtly notching out things dynamically. You could do the same exact thing with a multiband compressor, but the Waves package and interface makes it much more musical and a little easier to work with. So we have band number 5 here set up, the threshold. And it's just those really, really brittle high notes. It's just taken off a little bit of those, but only when it hits that frequency and at that threshold. Everything else stays the same, doesn't change the guitar tone in any way. It's a great subtle tool. It can be a hammer when you need it to be, and a lot of other things, but for this application, it works great just to notch out a little bit of the real brittleness. Next thing we're going to put on there is a compressor. This is going to bring the apparent level up a little bit, but what it's really doing is simply bringing the floor up. We're going to choose a CLA 3A, and this does things really well without being really heavy-handed. It's just going to even out his notes a little bit and make sure that all of the notes can be heard during the solo. Next thing we're going to do is add a mono delay to the mix. And the reason we're doing it here in the mix, like we talked about earlier, is because this can be tempo synced. We can actually match this to the tempo of the song. And that can be a lot of different things. So for example, that could be a much faster delay. So if we wanted to slap back, kind of a rockabilly thing, we could do that. Or a longer, like trailing solo delay. All right, so that's a little bit too long for what we're after. We're going to stick with 1/4. Great thing about this is you could disable that and get exactly the time that you want, but the sync makes it really quick to simply dive right into a great delay setting without having to do all the math and guesswork. The feedback determines how many repeats there are going to be in it. So we want about 20% is really about where we want to sit. Just enough to give that repeat a little bit of life. We're going to keep the mix at about 7-8%, somewhere around there. The filters here really determine how bright or how dull each one of those delays coming back are going to be. We have it currently set so that right around 3K, it's going to roll everything from there up smoothly off, and everything really about below 100 hertz roughly, it's going to roll everything under that off as well. So we end up with a very nice analog kind of organic sounding delay coming back at us. The last thing we're going to put in the chain is a reverb. We're going to choose its own reverb so the guitar can have its own identity and space, as opposed to using one of the reverbs that we have set out over here already for the rest of the mix. We're going to choose Cubase's own Revelation for this. It's a really lush and beautiful reverb to play with. It's got some incredible halls and plates and chambers and all kinds of things to play with. We're going to choose the scoring stage, which makes a great guitar room set at these settings. So we got a couple different settings here. Because this is going to be an insert, we're going to have the mix control here as opposed to simply feeding it on a bus. And this is going to determine the mix of the wet sound to the dry sound coming back. The level is simply going to turn the level of the reverb up and down. And then, of course, we've emphasized a little bit of the high end. We've rolled off a little bit of the low end. And we've got a little bit of modulation on the tail. This sounds like this. Might sound a little bit extreme at the moment, but we put that into the mix and we end up with this. There you have it, the truth about reamping your guitar. The most common methods to get the vibe and the tone that you're looking for in your own projects. Hey, special thanks to James for the Jess Ryan Band for helping us out. If you guys learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscribe and notification bells. Thanks for hanging out with us. Now it's time to go do something creative.